Okay, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and if this is your first time listening, then please go to porkinspolicyreview.wordpress.com, and there you can find all of the podcasts free for download. Well, on today's show, we are joined once again by one of our favorite guests, and that is Aaron Franz, of course, from the ageoftransitions.com. Aaron has been on the show many times before and is always a pleasure to have on the show. So, Aaron, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me back, Pierce. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, yeah. Well, me too. And today's show, we're going to be dealing with California cults. And specifically, cults that are in California, and as a whole, why we see so many prominent cults within the state. And Aaron, of course, you live in California. You used to live in Los Angeles. Now you live a little bit outside of LA, and I'm sure that you have had your fair share of run-ins with cult-related people and whatnot. So before we get into any kind of specifics about some of the cults that we're going to be talking about, could you give us just kind of a broad picture of California and the kind of cult activity that's within the state, some of the atmosphere that this kind of creates?
Well, California is pretty well known for being host to all kinds of cults, like a wide range of them all across the spectrum, from New Age to even like, your white supremacy things to all sorts of occult Armageddon themed cults. They're all here. They've all been here. They're still here. They've been here. They will be here. As something about the area that seems to cultivate cults, and actually cultivate and cult have the same root there, the same root word, and root in the soil, right? You cultivate in soil. But now I'm gone off on that. Let's just say that California is an interesting place. As you're saying, I lived in Los Angeles County down there in Long Beach. I just moved away. I'm out in Orange County, but we got our cults out here too. And Los Angeles specifically, I mean, whenever I talk about LA, I always mention I've never seen another place like it. I don't think that there ever has been another place like it. It's got a unique quality to it in so many different ways. And it really, something about it is, I don't know, I guess bewitching is a good sort of term to use, but there's something that will enamor people to it. It's enchanting, and these are all kind of, appropriate words talking about cults, but it really, it does have this quality that is interesting to it, and it's got a real lure to it. And I gotta say personally, it has this sort of appeal. For me, I kind of appreciate the architecture of the residential areas with all the hills. If you get over in Echo Park and Silver Lake, and then you go down Sunset Boulevard, sort of the Hollywood Hills, and over into the Pacific Palisades and all that, then on to Malibu, that whole area where they build houses on hills, I think actually there's a fitting metaphor there that kind of fits into what we're talking about today as well, and that it's actually quite a foolish thing to build a house on a hill like that. It's like not from an engineering standpoint, it's a bad idea. You got your landslides and stuff. It's not the ideal place to put a foundation for a house, and yet it's they've done it all throughout LA, and when you look at it, it's got this appeal. It's like, oh wow, I'd love to live up in those hills. That's like, it's really cool looking up there. And again, there's that appeal to it, and I just feel like, to me, it's sort of like the high ideals. If you're talking about a high ideal, it's something that it really appeals to you, and it has an attraction, and you want to be part of that idealistic lifestyle. You want to live the ideal, when in reality, the fact of the matter may be that it's a foolish thing to do. You know what I mean? And I just think that that's the fact that LA is built like that. And I just see it as a metaphor. Like, life up in the Hollywood Hills has such this attraction, and people want to do it, but it just ends up being a foolish thing in the end.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I guess, of course, we can also look historically, in the 1960s, Los Angeles and places like San Francisco were these kind of hotbeds of counterculture or supposed counterculture, wash and LSD and whatnot, and all sorts of other, CIA related things that I'm sure we'll get into, and I think that does factor in as well. But I'll say, as someone who has born and raised in New York City and has lived here basically all of my life, while a lot of New Yorkers do have a chip on their shoulder about LA, there is something sort of magical about Los Angeles in particular, and of course, Hollywood and whatnot, as we'll get into, is a big factor in all of this. But on some level, I can definitely see why so many cults would like to kind of move out there. Yeah,
well, hey, the weather's great.
Yeah.
And
and also, I think that unlike lots of other cults, say in the United States, many of the cults in California, as we'll get into, really have been able to achieve a tremendous amount of power, both culturally and politically. So, when you ask the man on the street about a cult, generally an image is conjured up about a bunch of survivalists or Jesus freaks out in Idaho or someplace like that in a bunker. Whereas in California, as we'll see, with groups such as Scientology or the People's Temple, these groups really do attain a level of influence that is sort of unprecedented for a cult. And perhaps with that, we can transition into our first sort of cult that we're going to be looking at. And this is one that I'm sure most of the listeners and most people in general are somewhat familiar with, and that is the Church of Scientology. For anybody who's unaware, Scientology was founded by L. Ron Hubbard, who was, of course, a science fiction writer, and he established the cult in 1953 in Camden, New Jersey. And I'll just say right now, keep this date, or the 50s, in mind, because we'll see that is some sort of time when a lot of these cults all start sprouting up. And later, of course, he moves it to Los Angeles. By the 1960s, the cult begins to flourish, and they start to recruit numerous celebrities. And of course, nowadays, everyone is very familiar with people like Tom Cruise, John Travolta. The list goes on. Basically, everybody who's anybody in Los Angeles who's an actor is also a member of the Church of Scientology. But Aaron, what are your just sort of general viewpoints on Scientology? Because it strikes me that Scientology is kind of one of these groups that almost seems to be kind of trying to make cults seem cool, or at least not so scary and cult-like.
Well, they have the advantage of having so many celebrity members. And, that's their advantage at this point. In the past, when they may not have had so many, were they working to get to that point? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that they're successful now, and that it has become like the celebrities cult, and that's what it's known for. I mean, everybody knows that. Like, oh yeah, Scientology, that's the thing that Tom Cruise is in, and all these other celebrities, and it's weird, and they're crazy, and Tom Cruise is kind of crazy, but at the same time, I don't care, because I want to see what Tom Cruise is doing in his personal life too. So, you get the that's I guess, to jump ahead real quick, if you're talking about dissociation in your mind, and how that relates to mind control. I mean, dissociation is key in, trauma-based mind control, that sort of topic. People dissociate all the time and sort of like have this love-hate relationship with celebrities, and like, in one sense they need to know everything about them, but they hate them. I don't even know. And I'm going off on a tangent there, but Scientology definitely appeals, for some reason, it appeals to celebrities. I think that the way that it is designed, the way that it goes about luring people in, I think it caters to people who are very much centered in their own ego, people who are very egocentric, people who are very sort of believe in self-righteous. They think that they're very self-important, people who feel self-important, and all that. And these are traits that I would say a large percentage of celebrities have. don't want to say all. You don't want to paint everybody with a wide brush like that. But I think it's safe to say that a lot of celebrities are pretty egoic and self-centered, and that they feel self-righteous about themselves. And it just seems to me that Scientology sort of caters to that instinct in people, or people who are of that mindset. And certain cults you'll find there are different sorts of cults for different personality types. And I do think that Scientology is a specific personality type that is appealed to.
Absolutely, and it's alleged that L. Ron Hubbard even said that with celebrities involved, it's very easy to kind of spread the influence of this and to get other people to join up. And he saw celebrities as the perfect vehicle for this. And of course, you take any celebrity and people obsess over what they're wearing, what fad that they're into, what diet trick works for them, and for me at least, I see that Scientology is also sort of a way of introducing cults to people and to kind of make them seem, if my favorite celebrity is a Scientologist, I guess maybe it's not that weird, and maybe I should kind of go along with the herd, so to speak, which I think is a lot about what cults are also about as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, if you have something to promote, a celebrity is the most valuable thing you can have on your side, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the topic of dissociation, as you were saying, we were talking off air about the concept of method acting and how some of these actors sort of inhabit their role beyond just being in front of the camera. And we have actors living in their costume, sleeping in it, talking in an accent, let's say, and that in and of itself is a weird sort of, I don't know, it's maybe self-induced mind control. But I see that as, if you can take on someone else's life and really live it and believe that you are this person, then it's very easy to kind of believe in Xenu and, trying to achieve a high thetan level and give all of your money to do that. But, do you have any thoughts on this, Aaron?
Well, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I was reading last night a little bit about Scientology, and apparently they have these different exercises they do for their members to brainwash the members, and one of them involves dealing with quotes from the book Alice in Wonderland. Did you know about this?
No.
Yeah, they'll sit there in one exercise. There's like a controller and then the student or whatever, and the controller is supposed to get specific response from a student. But basically, I think in one version of it, the student has to recite all these lines from Alice in Wonderland, and the way that they do it, they have to actually kind of present it as if they themselves are saying it and they actually believe what they're saying. And anybody who's read Alice in Wonderland knows that the book is complete nonsense. So if you're believing this nonsense text from Alice in Wonderland, you are yourself speaking madness. And if you're believing the madness you're saying, you are actually inducing madness in yourself. You know what I mean? So I did not know about that. That little bit of information came from a piece by William Sims Bainbridge, who I'll say is a very interesting character in and of himself. He did a study of Scientology and of another cult, where he actually got involved in the cult to study it. But later down the line, years later, he was one of the chairpersons for the 2001 NBIC technology conference that I talk about all the time, about transhumanism and stuff. And this guy Bainbridge is very much into transhumanism and virtual worlds and things like that. And he's very in favor of all those things. But at one time, he actually was studying Scientology and other cults from the inside.
Interesting. And of course, Scientology is full of sort of transhumanist type rhetoric, and obviously it's a cult based on science fiction.
Yeah,
and aliens inhabiting our bodies and whatnot. But kind of broadening this out a little bit, I wanted to talk about Scientology because, as I was saying in the intro, Scientology is a cult that really is sort of a, leaps and bounds above other cults in that if, and we can kind of debate how influential Scientology is right now, and I think we'll get to that, but certainly, all throughout the, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, they had a tremendous amount of power and influence. I mean, they were able to silence any and all critics. They've disappeared certain people. The current CEO of Scientology, David Miscavige's wife, has been missing for years now. No trace whatsoever. She hasn't appeared in public in several years, and David Miscavige keeps saying that she's just diligently working behind the scenes, which is bizarre in and of itself. But what about Scientology as culture creators? Because if we can posit that Scientologists control Hollywood to a large degree, and that all of the major movie stars are Scientologists, this is different from the average apocalyptic cult. And can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, you're raising good points about how Scientology has some very shady dealings behind the scenes, and obviously they put pressure on their members, to say the very least. I would say that paranoia runs rampant within the group from all evidence that we have available. That seems to be the case, that we've got a bunch of paranoid terrified people who are terrified of each other, and they're intimidated into not leaving the church or whatever it's called, Actually, they do call themselves a church, don't they? Yeah. Again, their main building downtown Los Angeles is one that has this dark appeal to it. It's actually painted sky blue. It's got some lions out front. Again, you look at the building and it has this odd quality about it, and it also creeps you out, and it tries to blend into the sky. But yeah, we've got culture creation is, as you and I talk about this subject so much because it's so important, this concept of culture creation, the idea that there can be a group of people who create media for the purpose of influencing culture and influencing society, and actually being effective in doing that, bringing about sociological change with purpose and with willpower. And you talk about willpower, that kind of factors into the whole Scientology thing too, and controlling the will. So we've got a group of people who believe that they're in control of their willpower, and they're honing it through all these practices that they do. At the same time, they're all paranoid and they're intimidated by each other. So I would say that this is the perfect sort of setup to have if you want to have your culture creation business be controlled. If you want to have control over your all the players in your culture creation game, you one way to do that is through this intimidation method. If your most famous actors, the people who, if they spoke any word they speak in public is going to be listened to. So at any given time, if an A-list actor comes out and says something, it will be listened to, and people will take it seriously. It can be the stupidest thing in the world, or it can be the most insightful thing in the world. People are automatically going to listen to it. So that's a volatile thing to be having as part of your business, right? So you got to keep that in check. So you got to intimidate them. You got to get them into this cult, so that a cult that they can't leave. You got to scare them. You got to threaten them with death if they, go against the cult, things like that. And I just see Scientology as the perfect method to do that. And I do think that probably is the case, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And of course, I mean, it's just, if they're producing these massive, movies that become almost a part of our culture, things like Top Gun with Tom Cruise and, Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta, it's very interesting to see that, well, if Scientology is behind all this, what is the message that they are trying to give us, or where are they trying to shift our consciousness or our social mores in a certain direction? And, I find that all really interesting. And I don't know if you know about this, Aaron, but L. Fletcher Prudy, who is Mr. X in the JFK film by Oliver Stone. I think he's played by Donald Sutherland. Fletcher Prudy actually worked for the Church of Scientology, I believe it was in the 1980s, and later broke away from them and denounced them and whatnot. But he claimed that L. Ron Hubbard, who was in the military for several years, was some sort of sheep-dipped intelligence agent. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that idea, because I know that that's been put forth by several people, and I don't really have any particular hard evidence, but I wouldn't at all be surprised. But did you have anything to say on that at all?
Well, I pretty much have the same opinion of you right there in that I wouldn't be surprised at all if that were the case. I don't know a whole lot about it, but that would make a lot of sense. You know, you put this strange character wearing a captain's hat out into the public view, and you say, hey, look, this Captain Hubbard here is the author of Dianetics. He came up with the whole idea. Here, check him out. And you probably know that Scientology is a bit weird. Well, it's because of this weird guy, you know. And just cults and certainly secret societies. Cults fashion themselves on secret societies, and secret societies could accurately be described as cults. There's, you know, an intimate relationship there. You tend to find that any sort of public figure that's given out in these organizations is just a front figure. And this kind of coincides perfectly with acting as well, because actors are just front people too. They're just faces. They're faces for, you know, in terms of culture creation, they're the faces of ideas. You know, movies are these ideas given to us. And, you know, it's just a stage play on a screen. They're the actors. You know, they're reading off a script. They're just the readers of a script. They do so well. They do it so convincingly, but they're not the ones who wrote the script, are they? No focus is ever given on those who are the script writers, the idea creators, those who are like putting together the ideas that go into these stories that everybody watches, that affect everybody's minds and consciousness. That never will you see attention on Entertainment Tonight to, oh, this screenwriter Barry Goldsmith was seen in Hollywood and Vine today hanging out with SpongeBob SquarePants. Oh, he's just like regular people. Like he probably was, but nobody cares. Nobody's going to write a story about it because everybody's looking at, you know, what the best-known Scientologist actor is doing. And that I don't know. It's a lot of silliness, and it's people's attention diverted away from what actually matters. And I would like to see people's attention diverted or pointed to things that do matter a little more.
Yeah, and I think in the past few years we have seen Scientology's power start to diminish slightly. And there have been lots of, you know, kind of high-level defections, like Paul Haggis, who is a screenwriter, who I think he wrote Crash and $1 Million Baby, and then there's Leah Remini, who was on The King of Queens, is one of the highest-paid actresses in television, and they've both left and have spoken out, and there have been lots of pretty good books, one by Lawrence Wright called Going Clear, another one by Janet Reitman, who used to write for the Rolling Stone magazine. So we have seen them waning, and I think at some point, you know, there's also tons of anyone that goes to websites like Underground Bunker or Operation Clambake will see that they're in, you know, up to their eyeballs being sued for embezzlement and all sorts of things like that. So I think their influence will wane, but I think inevitably there's too much time and money and effort put into Scientology for it to just disappear, and there'll be some new iteration of this. And perhaps with that we can kind of shift into another iteration of Scientology and a cult that I know that you've done some work on, and that's the Process Church. And you want to explain what the Process Church is exactly?
Sure. Well, Process Church is, as you say, splintered off of Scientology in a way. The founders of the church, De Grimston, this guy De Grimston, I think Robert De Grimston, and his wife, I believe it was his wife, Alice, I think is her name. They were in a British Scientology group, and they split off from Scientology to start their own group. That was a self-help group. Very interesting. They started a self-help group, and that later formed into what they called the Process Church. The Process Church of the Final Judgment is the full name of their group. So this is an Armageddon based cult religion that eventually it did come to California. It moved. It moved all the way from London. They moved from London, came to the States, and then they eventually came to San Francisco, and they did have a chapter, and they were doing things in Los Angeles as well. Interestingly enough, John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas had some involvement with the Process Church too. And I know if anybody's read David McGowan's book or series on Laurel Canyon will know that John Phillips is a very important person, an influential person, and very dark and disturbing character. So he factors into this. You'll see that Charles Manson kind of wiggles his way in there, and he at one point was smugly saying that De Grimston, the leader of the Process Church, and himself were one and the same, more or less. And he had written an article for one of their zines, or whatever you want to call it. He had written an article for them. And then later, you could see that a very concerted effort was put into place to sever ties with Manson, and Manson later retracted his statements and never spoke about the Process Church again. And this was after a visit in prison where two members of the Process Church visited Manson, presumably to shut him up about that. But the Process Church is a very interesting thing. They have this deal where they have 4 deities that they worship: Jehovah, Jesus, Satan, and Lucifer. And it's all wrapped up into Armageddon, and Armageddon's coming, and in the end all things will synthesize. And they also have this concept that peace and ultimate unity will come. So it's pretty typical of kind of like New Agey cults in that sense, and that the perfect unity of all good and evil will balance themselves out and all that kind of business. It's pretty interesting in that regard, but it's interesting in so many ways because of who was involved with it and what was going on, and I don't know. It's just a crazy thing.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that the idea of cults being some sort of social experiment, I think is really fascinating and interesting. And I think that, of course, when you involve celebrities or sort of pseudo-celebrities like Charles Manson, who was very well known within the music scene in Laurel Canyon and in Los Angeles, that's very interesting, and that sort of makes you wonder if actors and musicians and these kind of people are creating the things that we consume, but they're also part of some sort of mysterious shadowy cult. You do kind of wonder, is this who's orchestrating this? Is this really L. Ron Hubbard sitting and writing Dianetics, or is there someone telling what to write?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Master by Paul Thomas Anderson, but that is essentially about Scientology. And in the movie, Philip Seymour Hoffman plays the leader of this cult, but you actually find out later on that his wife, who is played by Amy Adams, is actually telling him what to write, which is interesting.
That's exactly the case with the Process Church, is that the high-ranking member came out and wrote a book about it, and he said that wasn't Robert de Grimston, but his wife, who was the mastermind, and she actually kicked him out at one point, and the Process Church later changed, and it went through. It's still around today, and it's some sort of like animal rights sort of group or something. It's like eventually morphed into that, but the main point being to find new ways to take money from the members of the cult. And of course that was going on very much with the Process Church and with Scientology and so many other churches. They demand that you give a portion of your income, if not all of it, to the church. And the Process Church actually called it a tithe, which that old term tithe, tying back to religion. So they say, you have to pay a tithe of 1/10 of your income to the church. That's one of the prerequisites to joining. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's cults. I mean, that's cults 101 there. I mean, everybody knows that they do that.
Absolutely. And And maybe we'll kind of shift out of Scientology, because I think both of us could probably talk about them forever. And I certainly have spent a lot of my time researching Scientology and looking into it. And I would encourage all the listeners to do their own digging, because there's a bigger story. And for whatever reason, there aren't many people in the alternative media that talk about Scientology, which I find weird, because so many of us talk a lot about Hollywood and the sort of Hollywood industrial complex, but behind that is this bizarre group that's controlling much of Hollywood. So a great topic to go into. But let's shift a little bit, and perhaps we could talk briefly about the Summit Lighthouse. I know that's another group that you've done on your show, and again, they also have a weird sort of connection with transhumanism, and they're, as far as I know, they're still around today. Is that correct, Aaron?
They are still around today. They originally set up shop out in Malibu, and their facility was an old church. I don't know if it was a Catholic church or what, but they converted it for their purposes and turned it into cult headquarters, like a teaching area where they had their classes and all this, that, and the other. So they started in Malibu. Today they're out in Montana. Actually, they made it out to Montana. That's still going. There's still people who live live within the church, live within the cult and on the premises, and they all do their thing every day. And so it's interesting to see the staying power that even these obscure cults have. I mean, once they lay down their roots, I mean, they tend to stick around. It's pretty impressive. But it was basically a New Age cult that their other name, they went by the name Church Universal and Triumphant, CUT, cut. So again, their idea, which is prevalent in many cults, was that they were going to be the harbingers of this sort of ultimate church, the correct church that would come after some sort of apocalyptic time on Earth. There'd be a time of troubles, but then after that, their church would rise up from the ashes and guide humanity to this new era, blah, 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 peace, unity. And they have a lot of stuff about alchemy, which the Process Church also is tied to alchemy as well. So, yeah, you'll find all these occult themes running throughout cults.
Yes.
And there's a lot to talk about there. There's a lot of meaning in that, and a lot of misunderstood, as with all occult subjects, it's completely misunderstood by outsiders, and people will want to just like throw the occult significance of anything out the window and not even look at it and just think it's all hogwash, just like any sort of ramblings from some crazy cult member would give you. But there's more to it than that, I really do think.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And on the kind of occult note for a minute, what do you think about groups like the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles, founded by Manly P. Hall, and there's a lot of Rosicrucian shrines and temples and whatnot, and a lot of cult leaders. L. Ron Hubbard himself was spent time researching the occult. The Summit Lighthouse, as you talked about in I think 3 different podcasts, used alchemy quite extensively in their own talking. How do you see groups like the Philosophical Research Society and Rosicrucians and the occult? How do you see that fitting in with cults in general?
I'm glad you mentioned the Philosophical Research Society. That was something that I kind of wanted to bring up but I had forgotten until you mentioned it. And it's actually their facility is right there in the thick of what I was talking about at the beginning with the hills, the running hills that start in Echo Park, and it goes through. If we're talking about the Philosophical Research Society, it's right at the foot of Griffith Park, which is this park built onto a hill, and at the top of the hill there's this famous observatory up there. There's all sorts of occult stuff in that observatory, actually, and when you look around, that's pretty interesting in itself. But at the foot of the hill you have the Philosophic Research Society, which is the legacy, in a sense, of Manly P. Hall, who is arguably the most famous occultist, certainly occult researcher of all time. Highly influential guy, a guy whose material I actually very much enjoy. I think that he was his books are very useful to read. The Philosophical Research Society is still there, and it has a lot of. I think that his personal library was basically converted into that.
That's right.
And they have a university there that you can also attend online. I've never been to the PRS. It's been one of the things I've wanted to go to. I just haven't made it to yet, but it is up there in LA, and it's in the thick of it. It's there in those hills, as I said. It's got some Egyptian sort of figures out front and some interesting inscriptions on the facade. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting place.
Yeah. Oh, and just to kind of bring that kind of full circle and involve the military and intelligence and whatnot. Manly P. Hall was a big follower of Nicholas Roerich, who is a very famous guru and occultist who basically worked as a spy for FDR during the beginnings of World War II and even in the 30s as well, and was a spy in Manchuria while he was searching for Jacob's Pillow, the Holy Grail, Philosopher's Stone, whatever you want to say. So I find that all really interesting, that it all can kind of tie in together, maybe loosely or sort of tangentially, but I do find all of that really interesting. And of course, the idea too that cults kind of take occult aspects and kind of morph them into this. There are obviously within the occult there are dark, evil forces at work, but there is also positive power that can be achieved through the occult. And it's interesting that they kind of corrupt that and turn it into this sort of evil thing, even if they're pretending that what they're preaching is positive. At the end of the day, essentially, I mean, they're harming people and stealing their money. So that's an interesting connection there.
Yeah, what cults are doing with the occult sciences are taking a time-tested method to affect the human consciousness and human being, that being occult science. That's what occult sciences are. They're taking that and they're using it for their own purposes, and purposes being highly selfish. I mean, anybody who knows anything about cults knows that the cult leaders are typically psychopathic control freaks that are only out for their own personal gain, and they don't care anything about their followers. They pretend to be saving them, but it's all just a mind game. So, the question is, I mean, I think it would be useful for just the average person to look at a cult and a cult leader and say, well, how does that happen? How does a regular person fall into one of those? How do you get to believe that a cult leader is who they say they are, like the second coming of Jesus or whatever? Like, how does someone actually believe that? And you would have to understand that there's a method in getting people enamored with you and your own cult of personality. There must be some kind of method to do it, because people have done it over and over again.
Yeah, and I think there's also a kind of a prejudice towards people that are in cults as being, I don't know, kind of naive or even sort of low intelligence or easily persuaded, and I don't think that's really true at all. And you've on your show you've talked with a former cult member, and he's extremely articulate, very intelligent, and doesn't it all strike you like the type of person that would get mixed up in this? Oh no, go ahead, Aaron.
I was just gonna say, I don't at all believe that only fools or people who are some sort of lacking in intelligence are the ones who fall into cults. I think that highly intelligent people fall into cults all the time, and I think that fact is amazingly fascinating in itself. How does that happen? Again, we have to ask ourselves that.
Yeah. Oh, and of course, there's the whole adage that hypnotism actually works better on super intelligent people that go to Ivy League schools, whereas a steel worker is not going to get hypnotized quite as easily.
Yeah.
And that brings up all sorts of weird questions about persuasion and and of course, I mean, you could broaden that out to, I mean, the cult around people like Obama or John McCain, whatever. Pick a politician. I mean, people will, just go insane and will hold, they'll cling on to every single little thing they say, and they will criticize anybody as being an idiot for, pointing out a factual mistake or something like that. So, yeah, I think anybody can get into a cult.
Cult of personality. That's what they call that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think let's shift gears a little bit to a cult that I have been really fascinated with in the past few weeks, and I've been doing a lot of research on. And I think this one, like Scientology, also encapsulates this bizarre sort of I don't even know, bizarre kind of a California cults thing that we're talking about here, and that would be the People's Temple, which was a cult that Jim Jones, who I'm sure everyone is at least familiar with, the Jonestown, this mass suicide, 909 people, all allegedly at least, drank cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. Mm-hmm. And again, Jim Jones founds his cult in 1955, so just 2 years after L. Ron Hubbard, and before we mentioned the Summit Lighthouse, that cult was, of course, founded in 1958. So bizarre that all these cults in the 50s and then they all moved to California and sprout up in the 60s. But anyway, Jim Jones founds the cult in Indianapolis, and he sort of, I guess presents himself more as like a preacher, would maybe be like an easy way to do this, and he presents himself, at least in the public, as being very egalitarian. He's pro-integration at a time when that was, not very chic to be a part of. And he also, interesting, and I hope we get to this, he really is into, Marxism and communism and communal living, and he pushes that almost to this ridiculous extreme. He is able to achieve within Indianapolis. He's appointed to the head of the Indianapolis Human Rights Commission for basically adopting two children. I think one was Korean and the other was black. This, of course, I guess makes him a human rights advocate or something.
Such a humanitarian, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then in 1961, Jones moves his entire family to Brazil. And anyone that's interested in this, I would really highly recommend Mae Brussels' 3-part series on her radio show that she did back in 1978 on Jim Jones. And she goes into really specific detail about all of this, and that when he was in Brazil, he was allegedly meeting with embassy officials, and they were the ones who were bringing him his groceries. And it's in Brazil that Jim Jones first goes to Guyana to perhaps scout a location. And then he returns in 1963. He sets up shop in Ukiah in Northern California to wait out the nuclear apocalypse. So again, we're back to this apocalypse thing. And he believes that after the nuclear apocalypse, they'll all be safe up in Ukiah, no nukes there. And that after this nuclear apocalypse, there will be this new age of racial equality based around communism and communal living. And then, later on, they move to San Francisco, which is where they're very famous. And I'll just, just the highlights here, just to kind of give you the idea of who this guy is, and then I think we'll get into it more. But while Jim Jones is in San Francisco, he ingratiates himself with the political class as well as the media class within there. And he helps get George Moscone elected mayor in 1975, and it's later discovered that Jones was bussing in people from outside of San Francisco to vote for Moscone. And then he later gets Harvey Milk elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, which is like a city council. And this, of course, unsurprisingly, is completely omitted in the Academy Award-winning film Milk, starring Sean Penn. There's not one single mention of Jim Jones or his influence within San Francisco politics, but he really was this every politician had to go to Jim Jones or had to have Jones speak at a rally or whatnot. He also met with Rosalind Carter several times, Jimmy Carter's wife, and Walter Mondale, and there's a famous video of him and Rosalind Carter at the commemoration of the Democratic Party headquarters in San Francisco. He was also a big supporter of the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army, which kidnapped Patty Hearst. And interestingly enough, Patty Hearst's boyfriend at the time, Stephen Weed, knew Jim Jones. And actually, at least allegedly, and this is through Mae Brussels and people like Colin Ross who have done some research on this, where they were actually meeting before she was kidnapped, and then after she was kidnapped, Jim Jones praised her. And I'll wrap this up here because obviously there's a lot we could go into about Jim Jones, and we're not even touching what happened in Guyana. But this again is this figure who, for all intents and purposes, is a scary cult leader. With the big dark glasses, and by the time that George Moscone was elected governor, he had somehow accumulated all of these different children, and basically stole 2 kids from a husband and wife who were within the People's Temple, and he got them to sign away the rights to these 2 children. Harvey Milk, again omitted in the film, wrote a letter to Jimmy Carter defending Jim Jones when he was being attacked in San Francisco. And then later, of course, the attacks become too extreme, and he runs away to Guyana, and where this horrific mass suicide or mass murder takes place. But of course, not before being elected head of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission. So again, a very high-level position. But, how do you... I almost just want to say, like, how the hell does this happen? How does a cult leader like Jim Jones get to that kind of level of influence where he is, appointed to a powerful, the housing authority in San Francisco? We're talking about a huge city that's very influential, within California and the nation as a whole. How does someone like Jim Jones meet with Rosalind Carter, get Harvey Milk elected? And how does this factor in with the 1970s, and we could get into MK Ultra, but how does a cult leader like that get to that kind of level of power?
I guess the simple answer might be that they use the same sort of influential techniques they do on their cult members on the folks in the political system. And you could argue that the political system itself kind of has to do the same thing as a cult leader, and that you just have to instill devotion, unthinking devotion most of the time, into the minds of the public. In this case, the public are the cult members who are believing in the cult of personality that happens to be any given politician, right? So it's not so much of a stretch that a literal cult leader would somehow work his way into politics and say, hey, I was born to do this. This is my gig. I understand you people. Like, I've been doing the same thing. I've got my own projects on the side. Check this out. Look what I did. And maybe the politicians, being fellow psychopaths, could respect that and be like, hey, look, this guy's got some good techniques. Maybe we could learn something from him. Maybe there's something to gain out of this guy, and, we'll bring him along for the ride. I don't know. I guess that'd be the simple explanation.
And I guess I definitely can take that, but there is something to the People's Temple, and as you're saying, same with Scientology, where I just see that there's something else behind this. And I know people have definitely brought up the idea of Jonestown, and what that was that some sort of MK Ultra experiment. And I think that there's a bit of that, and also a bit of kind of cleaning up house with whatever was going on down there, and whoever was involved. And we've got the assassination of the congressman Leo Ryan, who goes down there, and just to kind of throw a little more gasoline on the fire. After George Moscone is assassinated 9 days after Jonestown, who becomes the mayor of San Francisco? Dianne Feinstein, who is now one of the most powerful senators in the Senate, in Congress right now, and kind of scary. How a cult leader can kind of thrust or in some ways thrust this woman into power. Yeah, it's amazing. And apparently the true story of Jonestown down there was not that they all drank the poison Kool-Aid and committed suicide, but they were actually they were executed. That's what I have heard. I don't know all the details on that, but I mean, if they were trying to clean up house, as you're saying, and sort of get rid of these mind control subjects or whatever they happen to be, I mean, it would make sense that they just flat out executed them and didn't and then make up a story afterward, one that is convincing, because they're a cult and they're crazy and they'll do anything, and this kind of so the members of the public will just believe any story you tell them, because they're crazy cult members that were brainwashed by Jones, and he made them kill themselves, and they did it. Yeah, and I think, and that also brings up this idea too of Jones promoting communism still at its, I mean, in the 70s, obviously there were communists and there were different sort of radical groups, but it still wasn't that accepted by and large by the mass public. And how do you see that? Because I feel like it's an interesting thing with cults, the way that they'll sort of embrace certain things like that, and then they'll come to some sort of horrific demise, and then suddenly we can write off all of their communism or Marxism, which I would never really advocate, obviously, but I think there was a concerted effort to link his alleged anti-racist thoughts with communism, and to sort of say that the two are somehow linked, and look what Jones did, and then it's just exactly like you're saying, look, all these people killed themselves, so much for communism, and then of course we get Ronald Reagan from California.
Well, you can attach an idea to a person, and this comes back to the concept of celebrity too. You can use celebrities to present an idea. So the celebrity becomes the embodiment of certain principles and even ideologies, things like communism. So if you and your political group, your political allies have some sort of if your foe is communism, if that's your antagonist, if that's something you want to fight against, well, you fight against the person who embodies that, right? And you just take them out, and then you slander them or what have you. And so I don't know, I'm just always fascinated by perceptions and ideas, and how you can attach people to ideas, how the ideas in people's heads can get so twisted around. That's cults again. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're twisting people's minds, and it's just crazy. The realm of the mind is something little understood, little looked at. So few people actually take the time to think about the workings of the mind, and how fragile we are, and try to really find answers to these questions that pertain to cults. Like, why do cults exist? Why do people become cult members? Why are we so susceptible to brainwashing? Why do we want to be brainwashed? Do we want to follow a cult leader? Is that some sort of impulse? That's some kind of is it a biological thing? Is it something more than that? What's really going on?
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of people, I mean, they want to follow somebody. And they will latch on to whoever sounds good at the moment, and I think that's an unfortunate thing in the alternative media. There's a lot of cult-like behavior surrounding certain people, certain groups, certain politicians that are supposedly alternative and whatnot, and people will just kind of jump on that bandwagon. But going back to something you were saying before, like, do we want to be brainwashed? Are we just so? There are moments where I kind of see that we've just sort of accepted cult-like behavior to a degree where you do kind of wonder, is this the answer that we're searching for? Is just some guy up on stage telling us, what we want to hear? And
it's easy. It's the easy way. You just let somebody else tell you what to think, and you go on autopilot. You know what I mean? Yeah. So mind control would be the ultimate form of autopilot, right? Where you don't have to do anything. You don't have to think for yourself anymore.
Right. Absolutely. How do you see yoga factored into this? And I know that might start turning off some people, and I feel like I can already hear people turning off the podcast right now. But yoga is one of these weird things in that obviously it's existed for, I don't know, probably thousands of years, but there is definitely an explosion in the past decade or so of yoga studios and people teaching yoga. If you get on a train in New York City, believe me, you can count, there'll be 20 people on the train with yoga. And I know that, gurus, which can basically be a polite way of saying cult leader, use yoga sometimes in order, or at least use it within their teachings. And that kind of, makes you wonder about the whole guru movement and this whole Eastern influence. And, you get lots of these weird gurus from India, or a lot of the time now that is just white guys from, America who go and they become gurus. But how do you see yoga fitting into this? Just because I think it's an interesting topic, and it's one of those things where nowadays it's like everywhere.
Yeah, well, this is an excellent question. I'm glad you asked it, because I too have noticed the rise of yoga within the past decade or so. I mean, without a doubt, you just see it everywhere. Mm-hmm. And personally, when I see something promoted so much, I wonder, what's behind the promotion and why the big push for this, and what's really the big idea here? Is there a reason that's being promoted other than just, well, it's good exercise? You know what I mean? And that's kind of the exoteric interpretation of yoga is missing a lot of the real meaning of the practice, in that we've come to think that, this is a great way to stay in shape. It's a great way to stay, keep from getting injuries, and that much is true. Sure, yeah, that's fine. The exoteric interpretation is correct. I'll give you that. But again, celebrities are doing it, so that's again a PR. Whenever I see a celebrity doing something and therefore promoting it, I automatically think of the PR implications, because that's what I do. And yoga itself originally is tied into the mystic occult tradition. It was designed to bridge the gap between material and metaphysical existence, actually. It's a way of disciplining the body in order to achieve greater connection to that which is beyond the body, actually. In order to actually be in total control of oneself, that's sort of the prerequisite to do all these sorts of metaphysical practices and all sorts of, occult sciences, things like this. So that's what the yogic tradition actually started as. It's an occult practice. It's an ancient practice. It's that whole side of things is completely lost and misunderstood, and maybe sometimes taken in a very generic and misunderstood way. But that's significant. We have to understand that that's what yoga is, and we're not understanding it as such.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, you can break it down to that, for people, yoga is a religion. And not in a sort of silly sense of, oh, yeah, it's my religion, I love doing yoga, but that there is more to yoga than, just getting in shape.
Yeah.
But I guess I find it interesting that, yoga practices and are, the whole New Age movement in general, and there is definitely there are certainly New Age cults, and there is a cult-like nature to a lot of the New Age movement, and their association with yoga. Of course, veganism is another one that's interesting, and cults have traditionally used vegan, or at least the prohibiting eating of meat for their cult members. So I find that really interesting as well, and kind of combining, and again, it kind of, I guess, along the lines of corrupting the occult. People are maybe corrupting yoga, but that and veganism as well. Although, I mean, no one's there's no primitive culture that was vegan. So
no. This is all very California, so it's appropriate that you brought up yoga. I mean, the vegan yoga enthusiast who's probably into a lot of New Agey concepts is, the kind of person that one thinks of as the Californian, or that's one of a set of Californians that you'll meet, sort of stereotype. And, people embody stereotypes. A stereotype is something that becomes real. Yes, it's a stereotype. Yes, it's silly and generic. But people actually kind of take that on as their identity, and they become a stereotype. I see it all the time. And it just... I've seen the vegan yoga New Age types quite a bit, and it's just always, when I come in contact with them, a lot of times they're, a nice person, whatever, but it's just, I feel this disappointment that, oh man, you're really doing this to yourself. I mean, you know what you're doing? You've become that flaky, loopy Californian weirdo that everybody talks about. You're perpetuating the stereotype. Why do you have to do this to yourself and to us?
Oh yeah, And just to beat up on vegans again, 'cause it's pretty easy. They eat nothing processed soy constantly. And it's just not good. And the people that produce soy are some of the most evil corporations you could imagine. So it's not that alternative or counterculture to be vegan. And again, there's no society. Only rich white people can be vegans.
It's incredibly unhealthy. I'll just leave it at that. It's not a healthy thing to do. No.
Exactly. And of course, we're talking about, cults use veganism and use, prohibit their members from eating meat because it does kind of make you more, it makes you more suggestible to certain, tactics or mind control or whatnot. So that, it's just food for thought for all the vegans in the audience right now.
Yeah, they're mad, I'm sure. And I mean, I don't know. They're such, I don't know. They can be so nice, but it's just the truth is that veganism is not a nice thing. When you dissect it truthfully and honestly, I don't see it as I don't see any good in it, to be quite honest. And I'm not afraid of stating that as my opinion because that's the way I see things.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could both take on a vegan if they have something to say. But before we
we're talking about beating up right now. We're talking about beating up vegans.
Yeah.
Really, the conversation's gone south now.
Yeah. So before we completely get derailed by yoga and veganism, we'll start to wrap this up. But Aaron, as a Californian, as someone who's lived in Los Angeles, do you have any, particular personal stories about cults or cult people or how this has, affected you on a personal level? Anything like that you'd like to tell the listeners about?
Well, in terms of the cult of celebrity, if you spend any time in LA, and I spent the past month working in downtown LA, so I got a lot of this, you'll just experience, the people that are in LA living. Typically, you talk to them and they'll be like, oh yeah, I've been here for 6 months, or, I've been here for a certain amount of time. And they're, trying to do the acting thing, and they're very much into that. And, they've got you can tell that they've got the look for TV. So it's like, oh yeah, okay, this person's an actor. They're trying to, they'll tell you stories. They've been on this or that reality show. And so, you just come into contact with that because that's the industry that's in the area. So you see that's just a typical everyday thing. And then you'll also, you'll pass by celebrities now and then. You'll see celebrities like, oh, there's that guy. And, whatever. That's something that happens out here. And also you do hear very interesting tidbits now and again about celebrities or about something to do with the entertainment industry that – you're hearing it second or third hand. So I'm always, whenever I hear a story, I'm like, okay, this isn't my story. I have to take it with a grain of salt, but I'm incredibly captivated by the story. You got me here. And I guess one that pops to mind would be that somebody was telling me it was their father or somebody used to be a police officer, and then they were in security, like they installed security systems or something, and they were working for, I'll just say, a very well-known Scientologist. I won't say who they said it was. It's a very well-known Scientologist. They were working for them, and they found bugs I forget if it was in the home, but certainly in the vehicle of this person. So the vehicle had been bugged. They were being tracked by Scientology. Again, this sort of thing I was talking about, where intimidation, paranoia, stuff like that. And you'll read lots of stuff about Scientology, the higher levels bugging, putting surveilling the lower members. So you'll read a lot of stories like this. I've been told stories like that. Again, is it true? Well, I can't say whether it is or not, but it's certainly pretty interesting. And, you just come in, you just talk to people on an everyday basis and you hear stories like this. And that's, I guess, would be part of the allure of living out here too, is that, it's just kind of part of life. This bizarre culture creating la la land entertainment industry is the industry out here. So in a way, it's the norm. It's what's here. So you're gonna hear something about it at some point.
Yeah. Oh, and I have several friends that have moved to Los Angeles to become actors, and not that they're, I think that they would all probably say Scientology is weird and occult, but they're also, very so caught up in this lifestyle that they kind of just forget who they are. And, I had one of my best friends who moved out there, and when they came to visit in New York City, they had forgotten how to take the subway. And they, I needed to tell them, oh, take this train and go here. And, it's like, we did this every day for, all high school and whatnot. So, I think the cult of celebrity is perhaps the most evil cult that is in California, certainly in Los Angeles, just because it is all consuming, and the town sort of in many ways revolves around that. But I think we'll leave it at right there for now. And obviously, I'm sure we'll be talking about this again, and there's a whole lot more to discuss about cults and these particular ones that we've gone into. But Aaron, could you tell everybody where they can go to find your podcast series and all the other stuff that you do, which is really fantastic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Pierce. My website is ageoftransitions.com. That's where you can find all my stuff. I do the podcast Transresistor Radio. If you haven't listened to it, listen. And if you like it, I hope you'll subscribe, download the episodes. I've also written some articles, haven't written too many recently. I've written a book, Revolve Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood, about transhumanism. I've also done a film, The Age of Transitions, about transhumanism. That's kind of one of the subjects I talk the most about. But I like to talk about all other important subjects, one being occult subjects, one being media and culture creation. Very important things. And all these things I do talk about connect together, oddly enough.
Absolutely. And please tell the audience about Themes and Memes as well.
Yes, Themes and Memes is available through the Transresistor Radio feed. So it is a special show that I do with Adam, my friend Adam of CerebralRevolt.com, where we do movie reviews. So we review a movie in a unique way, being that we try to pick apart the culture creation aspects of a film, the sociological implications, what filmmakers may or may not have had in mind for influencing an audience, trying to convince them of certain ideas, placing different memes in there with purpose, for whatever purpose that might be. So it's just us exploring movies from that point of view.
Excellent. Well, Aaron, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm sure we'll be talking again very soon. But thank you so much for coming back on.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me here, Pierce. It's always great to be on the show.
Okay, everybody, so that about does it for this episode of Porkins Policy Radio. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please visit porkinspolicyreview.wordpress.com, and there you can find all of the episodes free for download, as well as on YouTube. And you can follow me through the RSS feed, through email blasts, on Twitter at Porkins Policy, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/1138porkins. Now, I just have a few quick announcements, some exciting new news, and also some thank yous. And I'd like to thank Raina out in Orcas Island up in Washington State for her wonderful emails. And I'd like to thank everybody out in Orcas Island who has been enjoying the podcast. And it's just so wonderful to hear from listeners who are really enjoying the work. So thank you so much. I promise everybody out in Orcas Island, the next time I am in Washington State, I will definitely be making my way over there. And it'd just be fantastic to meet some listeners and some fans. I'd also like to thank Sibel Edmonds, and anybody who's been following me on Twitter knows that Sibel sent me an advance copy of her new book, which is a novel entitled The Lone Gladio. It is excellent, and Sibel is actually going to be joining us on the podcast to discuss the novel sometime probably in early October. We'll still need to hammer out a time and a date. But I'd just like to thank Sibel again for all the work that she does, for being supportive of the work that we're doing here on the podcast, and of course for sending me an advance copy of the book. And if anybody is curious about The Lone Gladio and what the book is about, then I would suggest going to boilingfrogspost.com, and you can check out some exclusive excerpts that Sibel has put up on the website, dealing with some of the different characters that are in the book. The book, of course, comes out in a few weeks. or not even in a few weeks, excuse me. The book comes out in a few days. The book is slated to be released on September 11th. So an important date, and I'm sure that will make more sense once we discuss the book and once hopefully the listeners read the book as well. And the other bit of exciting new news is we are starting a brand new podcast series on Porkins Policy Review. And this is going to be a new series between me and Christoph Gehrman, of course, who writes the New Great Game blog on christophgehrman.blogspot.com. Christoph has been a guest on the show before in episode 22, where we talked about Xinjiang, Azerbaijan, Gladio Plan B, and Turkey. And our new podcast series is going to be dealing entirely with Central Asia and the Caucasus and the War on Terror. We're going to be analyzing, different stories and different, trends that are going on in this region, and I'm really, really excited about this new podcast. We should have the first episode up sometime towards the end of September, which will be great because it'll coincide with our talk with Sibel Edmonds. So definitely, check out the website and Twitter and all of those things for updates. I'll be, posting up as much as I can on the new episode, the new podcast series, excuse me. And like I said, I'm really excited about it. And of course, thank you so much for listening. And of course, I will be talking to you very soon.